My name is Clara Reed. For the better part of my life, I have lived in Port Blossom, a city that wears its fog like a soft gray shawl, where the scent of rain on old cobblestones is a kind of perfume, and the cherry trees burst into a riot of defiant pink each spring, as if to remind us that beauty persists. I live in the house my husband, Samuel, and I bought 30 years ago, a modest cedar-shingled home with a garden that has become my sanctuary and my confessor. It was here, amidst the quiet company of my hydrangeas and the patient vigil of a Japanese maple, that my life took a turn I never anticipated. For 35 years, I was a senior financial analyst at Viridia Dynamics. I was part of the company's foundation, one of the quiet, sturdy pillars that you never notice until the structure begins to tremble. I remembered when our office was a cramped second-floor rental over a bakery, the air thick with the smell of warm bread and ambition. I saw it grow into a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reflected the moody Port Blossom sky. I wasn't just an employee. I was a witness, a custodian of its history. I remembered the names of the CEO's children, the date of our first major contract, and the precise blend of coffee the founders drink. I was loyal, not out of a lack of other options, but because I believed in the quiet dignity of building something to last. It all ended on a Tuesday morning in October. The fog was particularly thick that day, pressing against my window panes like a ghostly hand. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a place of countless memories, nursing a cup of Earl Grey tea and watching the mist soften the edges of the world. A notification chimed on my laptop, a small, unassuming sound that would unravel the tapestry of my life. It was an email from Human Resources. The subject line was chillingly benign, update to long-term employee compensation framework. I opened it, expecting some new digital tool or a minor policy adjustment. Instead, I found a meticulously worded, utterly soulless document. It spoke of strategic recalibration and proactive fiscal stewardship. Then came the sentence that hung in the airless digital space like a verdict. As part of this forward-looking initiative, the legacy pension program will be sunset for all non-executive staff, effective immediately. Sunset. The word was so gentle, so poetic, for an act of such profound violence. They had made the erasure of my future sound like a serene painting. There was no name attached, no signature, just the anonymous authority of the Viridia team. The tea in my cup grew cold. The familiar ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out the peaceful rhythm of my days since Samuel's passing, suddenly felt like a countdown to an unknown, terrifying future. 35 years of my life, of early mornings and late nights, of meticulously balanced ledgers and quarterly reports that I treated as works of art. The weekends I'd given up, the family events I'd missed, the unwavering belief that my dedication was a deposit in a bank of mutual respect. It had all been liquidated, sanitized by corporate jargon, and dismissed with the click of a button. I sat there for a long time, the gray light of the morning filling the silent kitchen. The fog outside seemed to have seeped into the house, into my very bones. I thought of Samuel. He had passed 7 years ago, a gentle fading from a world he had embraced with such vigor. Our savings were carefully managed, but they were planned as a supplement, a cushion to soften the years. The pension was the bedrock. Without it, the future wasn't just uncertain, it was a sheer cliff face I was expected to scale at 62. My first instinct was to call my son David. He lived across the country, a good man with a kind heart, a young family, and a life of his own. I dialed his number, my fingers trembling slightly. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm but hurried. "Hi, Mom. Is everything okay? Sophie has a bit of a fever, and we're just heading to the pediatrician." I heard the faint cry of my granddaughter in the background, a small, urgent sound that represented a world of immediate needs. My own crisis felt distant, abstract, a problem for another day. "Oh no, everything's fine, darling," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "I just called to say hello. Give Sophie a kiss for me." I ended the call and stared at the phone. I couldn't burden him. Not yet. This was my storm to weather. I had always been the capable one, the one who solved problems quietly and efficiently. To admit I was adrift felt like a failure of character. That evening, the house felt cavernous. Every empty chair seemed to accuse me of my solitude. I made a list, a habit ingrained from decades of managing complex projects. 1. Contact HR for clarification. 2. Review my employment contract. 3. Assess my financial situation. It was a futile attempt to impose order on chaos. The truth was, I felt a profound and terrifying helplessness, a feeling I hadn't known since the day I lost Samuel. I had believed in the system, in the implicit promise that if you gave your all, you would be taken care of. That belief had just been revealed as a childish fantasy. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the attic. It was a place of ghosts and memories, filled with boxes Samuel had labeled in his neat, architectural script. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just seeking a connection to a time when my life felt solid and knowable. The air was cool and smelled of cedar, old paper, and time itself. In a dusty corner, tucked behind a box of Christmas ornaments and my old university textbooks, was a heavy wooden chest. Samuel had called it the Ark, the place where we kept the things that truly mattered. Inside, beneath photo albums and his collection of first-edition poetry books, was a black leather binder. The gold embossing on the front was faded, but still legible. Acorn Systems. Acquisition Agreement. A shiver, not of cold, but of memory, traced a path down my spine. Acorn Systems. It was the company Samuel and I had built from nothing in our garage. He was the brilliant coder, the visionary. I was the one who managed the finances, the clients, the structure that allowed his genius to flourish. We created bespoke database solutions, elegant and reliable. We were a small but formidable team. 15 years ago, just after Samuel's diagnosis, we sold our beautiful little company to 40m Dynamics. It was a strategic acquisition for them, a way to integrate our stable, innovative backend into their growing portfolio. For us, it was supposed to be a way to buy time, to fund treatments and find peace. My fingers, stiff with a sudden chill, opened the binder. The pages were thick and creamy, the typewritten clauses a relic of another era. I hadn't looked at this document since the day we signed it, my heart a tangle of pride and sorrow. I started to read, my eyes scanning the dense legal language, a language I once knew so well. Non-competes, royalty schedules, intellectual property transfers. And then I saw it. Tucked deep within the document, a small, unassuming clause numbered 17B, Client and Personnel Continuity. I remembered it then. It was my clause. I had fought for it. Their lawyers had called it unconventional, unnecessary. But I had insisted. Samuel had been weary from his illness, but he had backed me, smiling faintly. Listen to my wife, he'd told them. She knows how to build things that last. The clause was a piece of intricate legal architecture. It stipulated that for the proprietary software of Acorn Systems to be used by any client of 40m Dynamics, certain conditions had to be met. The most crucial one stated that if I, Clara Reed, continued my employment with a 40m client in a senior financial role, my position would be considered integral to the good faith operation of the license. If my employment was terminated without cause, or if my contractually agreed upon compensation, including all vested retirement benefits, was fundamentally altered, it would constitute a material breach of the vendor agreement. The client, in this case, my own employer, would have 30 days to rectify the breach or negotiate a new license. Otherwise, their access to the core systems would be rendered void. It was a tripwire, a dormant piece of code in a contract everyone had forgotten. A legal safeguard Samuel and I had built to protect our legacy, to ensure that the soul of our little company wouldn't be carelessly stripped for parts. I sat there on the cold wooden floor of the attic, the binder in my lap, and a strange calm washed over me. The grief and fear hadn't vanished, but they were no longer a paralyzing fog. They were coalescing, hardening into something else. Something cold, clear, and sharp. It felt like resolve. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed midnight. In the silent, sleeping city, the executives at 40m Dynamics were oblivious. They had sunset my pension, erased my name from their future. They thought they were turning off a light. They had no idea they had just armed a bomb. And I was the only one who knew where it was hidden. The next day, I went to the office. I walked through the gleaming, impersonal lobby, my sensible shoes making no sound on the polished marble. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a visitor from another world. The polite nods from colleagues felt different now. They were tinged with pity or avoidance. I had become a cautionary tale, a ghost of loyalty past. My meeting was with Owen, my manager. He was a young man in his early 30s, bright and ambitious, who wore fashionable sneakers with his suits and used words like synergize and ideate with unnerving sincerity. I had trained him when he was an intern, patiently explaining the difference between accrual and cash accounting. Now, he sat across from me in his glass-walled office, an expression of practiced empathy on his face. "Clara," he began, steepling his fingers. "I know this transition is difficult. I want you to know that the leadership team values your immense contribution over the years." Transition. Another gentle word for a brutal act. "I'm not here to discuss my contributions, Owen," I said, my voice even and calm. "I'm here to understand the legal basis for the revocation of a vested benefit." He blinked, momentarily thrown off script. He cleared his throat and slid a glossy brochure across the table. "The company is evolving its benefit strategy to be more agile and market-aligned," he recited, his eyes avoiding mine. "We're offering all affected employees access to financial planning workshops and a new suite of digital wellness tools. There's a wonderful seminar on building personal resilience." Resilience. I had helped Viridia navigate 3 recessions, a hostile takeover attempt, and the complete digitization of their financial systems. I had stayed late to comfort a junior accountant whose mother had passed away during tax season. I had poured the foundation of this company's stability with my own 2 hands. And he was offering me a webinar. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a sudden, piercing clarity. He wasn't a villain. He was just a cog in a machine that had grown so large it had lost its memory, its humanity. He was following a protocol designed to minimize friction, to manage my gentle exit from the balance sheet. "Thank you, Owen," I said, taking the brochure. "I will be sure to review it." He seemed relieved, mistaking my composure for capitulation. As I stood to leave, he offered a final platitude. "You know, Clara, every ending is just a new beginning." I smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You have no idea," I said softly. For the next 2 weeks, I became a model of quiet compliance. I packed my personal belongings into a small cardboard box, a framed photo of Samuel and me on a trip to the coast, a chipped mug that said "World's Most Okayest Accountant," a thriving little succulent. I documented my workflows, answered questions from my replacement with serene patience, and smiled politely in the hallways. They saw a woman winding down, gracefully accepting her obsolescence. But at night, my quiet home transformed. My study, with its view of the moonlit garden, became my command center. The Acorn Systems binder lay open on my desk like a sacred text. I didn't need a wall of sticky notes or a frenzied all-night strategy session. The plan was already there, embedded in the logic of the contract. It required not rage, but precision. First, I liquidated a portion of my portfolio, the safe, boring index funds I had nurtured for decades. It was a significant sum, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Then came the harder decision. I took out a mortgage against my home, the house that held every memory of my life with Samuel. The thought was terrifying, a betrayal of the security we had built. But as I signed the papers, I felt Samuel's presence, not in judgment, but in encouragement. "Sometimes you have to risk the harbor to command the sea," he used to say. With the capital secured, I began to move. I wasn't a hedge fund manager or a corporate raider. I was an accountant. I understood systems, numbers, and the quiet, unseen pathways where influence flows. I established 3 separate LLCs, registered in different states, with names that were deliberately unassuming: Oakhaven Ventures, Stone Creek Capital, and Northgate Investments. They sounded like sleepy, conservative firms, the kind that would never attract attention. Through these entities, I began to buy shares of Viridia Dynamics. Not in large, dramatic blocks, but in a slow, steady, and meticulously calculated trickle. I spread the purchases across dozens of small transactions, never triggering the disclosure thresholds that would alert the SEC or the company's board. Viridia's stock was stable but undervalued, held mostly by large, indifferent institutional funds who wouldn't notice a few percentage points shifting here and there. I was invisible. A 62-year-old woman in a quiet suburb, moving millions of dollars through the arteries of the financial system from a laptop perched on her antique writing desk. The world saw a retiree tending her garden. In reality, I was assembling an army, one share at a time. There were moments of heart-stopping fear. A market dip that threatened to expose my position, a close call with a compliance flag at my brokerage. But the fear was different now. It was the thrill of a complex problem, the focus of a craftsman at her work. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. I was no longer just tending Samuel's memory. I was wielding the tools he and I had forged together. One rainy Tuesday night, exactly 4 weeks after I had received the email that changed everything, I executed the final trade. I watched the confirmation message appear on my screen. I ran the numbers, checked them twice, then a third time. Oakhaven held 18%. Stone Creek, 16%. Northgate, 17.5%. Total ownership, 51.5%. I was the majority shareholder of Viridia Dynamics. I didn't cheer. I didn't open a bottle of champagne. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the rain-streaked garden. The quiet house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt powerful. I had taken their cold, impersonal system and made it my own. The ghosts they had tried to exorcise from their books now owned the machine. The first official communication was not from me, Clara Reed, the recently sunset analyst. It was from the legal counsel of Oakhaven Ventures, an address registered to a discreet mail service in another state. The email was sent to Viridia's chief legal officer, a man I knew only by reputation, and copied to the entire board of directors. The subject line was simple: formal notification of material breach, vendor agreement v. 774A. The body of the email was brief and clinical. It quoted Clause 17b of the original Acorn Systems acquisition contract. It calmly detailed the recent termination of my pension benefits as a clear and indisputable breach. It concluded by formally invoking the 30-day rectification period. As per the terms of the agreement, it read, all licenses pertaining to the foundational architecture of the Acorn Systems software will be rendered null and void in 30 calendar days unless a mutually agreeable resolution is reached. We await your prompt response. I hit send and watched the email disappear into the digital ether. Then I set up an autoresponder for the Oakhaven legal address. Thank you for your message. This matter is under review. A representative will be in contact at the appropriate time. And then I went into my garden and began to prune the roses. The initial silence from Viridia was deafening. I could picture the scene, the email arriving, being flagged as probable spam or the work of a disgruntled crank. It would be forwarded to a junior attorney who would glance at it, dismiss it as frivolous, and move on to more pressing matters. Corporate arrogance is a powerful sedative. For 3 days, there was nothing. On the 4th day, I received a curt, condescending reply from a vice president of legal, a man named Julian Croft. To whom it may concern, his email began, "We are in receipt of your correspondence. Upon review, we find your claim to be without merit. The clause you reference is archaic and superseded by numerous subsequent agreements. We consider this matter closed." I read his message, a small smile playing on my lips. He hadn't read the contract. He had assumed. I didn't reply. The autoresponder did its job, a wall of polite, infuriating silence. I knew what would happen next. Somewhere in that glass tower, a younger, more meticulous lawyer, someone who still remembered the sting of a bad grade in contract law, would be troubled by Croft's glib dismissal. They would pull the original file from the archives. They would read Clause 17b. Then they would read the fine print that bound it to every subsequent renewal. And the quiet hum of the office would be pierced by the sound of dawning, ice-cold horror. By the end of the week, the whispers started. I heard from a former colleague in accounting, a kind woman named Maria with whom I'd shared lunch for 15 years. She called me, her voice a hushed mixture of confusion and concern. "Clara, something strange is happening," she said. "Legal has been pulling all the old vendor files, specifically the ones related to IT infrastructure. The executive wing has been in closed-door meetings all day. People are spooked." The panic was beginning to ripple outwards. They were realizing that their entire operational nervous system, their payroll, their client databases, their secure communications, everything, ran on a software framework whose license was now tied to the pension of the quiet woman they had just shown the door. They tried to fight it. They sent threatening letters from a high-powered external law firm. The autoresponder consumed them. They tried to trace the ownership of Oakhaven Ventures and my other LLCs, only to run into a labyrinth of legal firewalls I had carefully constructed. They were powerful, but they were fighting a shadow. They were looking for a rival corporation, a hostile billionaire. They were not looking for Clara Reed. With 10 days left on the clock, their tone shifted from arrogance to desperation. A new email arrived, this time from the CEO himself. It was addressed to the anonymous legal entity, a plea for a meeting, a discussion, a negotiation. I let them wait for 2 more days. Then I replied, "A representative will be available to meet at your headquarters on Thursday at 10 a.m. Please ensure all key decision-makers are present. There will be no remote option." The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a simple navy blue dress, the pearl earrings Samuel had given me for our 20th anniversary, and my most comfortable leather flats. I was not dressing for war. I was dressing as myself. My heart was calm. The anger had long since burned away, leaving behind a profound sense of purpose. I took a taxi downtown. As the skyline of Port Blossom rose to meet me, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, somber resolve. I walked into the Viridia lobby, the same space I had walked through thousands of times before. The receptionist, a young woman who had started only a few months ago, looked up. "May I help you?" "I'm here for the 10 a.m. meeting with the board," I said. "My name is Clara Reed." Her eyes widened in confusion as she scanned her screen. She saw the meeting, but the attendee was listed only as Oakhaven representative. She picked up the phone, her voice a nervous whisper. "Sir, she's here." A moment later, Julian Croft, the VP of Legal, emerged from the elevator. His face was a mask of disbelief, slowly crumbling into comprehension as he saw me standing there, calm and composed, holding my old leather handbag. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Clara," he breathed. "Mr. Croft," I said with a polite nod. "Shall we?" He led me to the executive conference room in silence. The air was thick with tension. The CEO, the CFO, the entire senior leadership team, the very people who had signed off on the sunsetting of my future, were seated around the vast mahogany table. They stared at me, their expressions a cocktail of confusion, shock, and dawning fear. I walked to the head of the table, the seat usually occupied by the CEO, and placed my handbag gently upon it. I did not sit. I simply looked at each of them in turn, my gaze steady and clear. "Good morning," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "I am the representative for Oakhaven Ventures. And Stone Creek Capital. And Northgate Investments." You could have heard a pin drop. The color drained from the CEO's face. "But that's not possible," the CFO stammered. "I've always been good with numbers," I said gently. "As of last Tuesday, my entities hold a 51.5% controlling interest in Viridia Dynamics. Which means that I am, for all intents and purposes, the vendor whose contract you have breached." I let the words hang in the air. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a lesson. This is extortion. Croft finally managed, his voice strained. "No," I replied, my tone unwavering. "It is accountability. You made a business decision. You sunset a legacy program to improve your balance sheet. I have simply made another business decision in response." I opened my handbag and took out a single folded piece of paper. I placed it on the table. It wasn't an invoice or a legal threat. It was a proposal. "There are 2 paths forward," I explained. "The first is that the 30-day period expires. Your software licenses become void. The disruption to your operations will be catastrophic, and the stock will collapse. I will then use my position as majority shareholder to replace the board and management. We will rebuild, but it will be a painful process for everyone. I paused, letting them absorb the reality of that future. The second path, I continued, is this. The CEO unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned it, his jaw tightening. My proposal was simple. The company would publicly announce the full and immediate reinstatement of the pension program for all 1,200 affected employees. They would also establish a new, legally binding charter, overseen by an independent ethics committee, to protect employee benefits from any future unilateral changes. Finally, the company would make a significant, multi-year contribution to a local fund for displaced workers in Port Blossom. There is no monetary demand for me personally, I said. My pension will be reinstated along with everyone else's. That is all I ever wanted. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoring what was broken. Not just the contract, but the trust. The room was silent. They were looking at me, but they were seeing something else. The quiet, invisible woman from finance, the one they had written off, now holding the fate of their entire enterprise in her hands. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my loyalty for passivity. The CEO looked up from the paper, his eyes holding a new, grudging respect. "And your shares?" he asked. "I will place my controlling shares in a blind trust, managed by a third party," I said. "I have no desire to run this company. I just want it to be the company I once believed it was. The one that remembered that its greatest asset was its people." I picked up my handbag. "You have until 5 o'clock this evening to accept the terms. I trust you will make a wise decision." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the proposal and a profound silence in my wake. As I walked back through the lobby, the city outside the glass walls seemed brighter. The fog was lifting. They accepted the terms before noon. My life did not change dramatically on the surface. I still live in my cedar-shingled house. I still tend my garden and drink Earl Grey tea at my kitchen table. But something fundamental within me has shifted. The helplessness is gone, replaced by a quiet strength I never knew I possessed. I didn't stay invisible. I took a position on the board of the new ethics committee, a gentle but firm presence in the room, a living reminder of the cost of forgetting. And with the security of my future restored, I began to volunteer at a legal aid clinic, helping people navigate the dense, intimidating world of employment contracts and benefit disputes. I found a new purpose, not in balancing ledgers, but in balancing the scales of justice, one small case at a time. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I look out at my garden, at the sturdy trunk of the Japanese maple and the resilient blooms of the hydrangeas. I think of Samuel, and I know he would be proud. We built acorn systems to create things that were elegant, reliable, and strong. I'd like to think that in the end, I managed to do the same with my own life. I learned that self-respect isn't something a company gives you, it's something you claim. And I learned that sometimes, the gentlest voice can be the most powerful one in the room, especially when it has truth and a well-written contract on its side.